History books call Mr. Tepish a prince. His enemies called him a monster. But when the Ottoman Empire came knocking, Vlad didn't just fight back. He built an entire forest of impaled bodies just to be sure that the message was clear. Welcome to the war where Vlad the Impaler proved something terrifying. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in history is fear. Impolite History! Welcome to Impolite History. We'll be your hosts this evening, and we're going to get into some history the way that they didn't teach you in school. How are you doing tonight, MC?
Oh, just another day. Blessed to have woken up. Quite a intense and heavy subject we got on our hands, but one of my favorites.
It is. I've actually looked up a lot about him lately, trying to get a different side of him. To his own people, he was probably a hero because he defended them better than anybody ever had, and nobody ever defended them quite as well as he did, So that is one way to look at him too. Yeah, the things he did were pretty brutal and barbaric and all of that good stuff. But I'll bet when he died, his people mourned him and felt safe under his rule. Because history in the region, he's a legend, and they remember him as being a just ruler. So his people probably actually adored him, even though everybody else was terrified.
Well, just doesn't always mean beloved. So Vlad did have a lot of admirers during his day, and he does have a lot of admirers in greater what used to be Wallachia and now is Greater Romania and Transylvania. But at the time, his style of enforcement, especially concerning laws, was very draconian. You would be subject to some very serious punishments for things that in today's day and age we might consider a slap on the wrist. But the thing is that one of the biggest things that his supporters would argue for him is that he judged everybody equally. It didn't matter if you were nobility, it didn't matter if you were the lowest of the low or the highest of the high. If you committed a crime, you committed a crime, and the punishments were always the same. Those punishments didn't always fit the crime by today's standards. A lot of them would be considered cruel and unusual. But at the time, he was very just in the fact that he didn't show favoritism to the ruling class or to the working class. Everybody could get the smoke.
Yeah. What I've seen is that he really kept the nobles in line. Like he wasn't having none of their bullshit at all. He didn't give a damn. I don't care who your daddy was. I don't care who your daddy is. I will kill both of y'all. Like that was basically his thing. And I wondered, and I tried to look up, like, did he ever punish innocent people? And just because of how, he ruled in fear. And just because of that, there probably were, he punished anybody he saw as an enemy or an invader or anything like that. So chances are there may have been some innocent people that really didn't do anything, but he was going to punish anyway.
For sure. There's a phenomenon that a lot of movies, especially in the historical settings, often don't get right. There have been a few that have kind of sort of nodded towards it, but a lot of historical movies don't actually get right the logistical baggage train of like support staff and family members that would travel with armies. And so when you look into the conflict that really made Vlad III as prominent a figure as he was, which was his and Walachia's second rebellion, I believe the second, against Mehmed II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The thing was is that Vlad had two options. He could be just through and through, or he could massacre these innocent civilians that would travel with these armed divisions and really set a precedent for what would happen if invasions continued to march into his kingdom. And he chose the latter. He chose to
Yeah.
make an example of everybody. It didn't matter if you were a cook, a nurse, just a wife that was traveling with a husband because you had nothing else going on at home and you wanted to see them come home. That happened a lot. There weren't a lot of wars that didn't have um, families and such that traveled with them. Um, at least in recorded history, up until the modern era, that's pretty much, you see it in some ways today with military dependents being able to move to to a potential station where their spouse is while they're in the armed forces, but there are still certain areas where you're not allowed to go because the risk is too great. Back in the day, the government would have told you you can go, but if you die or if you get attacked, we're not negotiating for you, nothing
Yeah.
like that. You
You're
understand that
on your
you're
own.
but for an army like the Ottoman empires, especially in the wake of having toppled Constantinople, they probably didn't see Wallachia, a province that they had already subjugated once and then had already brought to heel from a rebellion once. They probably didn't see any real risk. They probably thought that Vlad III was going to be squashed and they wouldn't have to worry about it again. And I believe there were 2 or 3 different incursions before Mehmed II himself finally led a force into Wallachia to sort the whole situation out himself. And 3 different times it almost cost him his life.
He's really lucky he walked away, honestly. He's really lucky that it wasn't his head going to Vlad's house. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. There are parts of that that I agree with, and there are parts of that I don't agree with, because at the time, the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful empires that the world had ever seen. I mean, they far outclassed the Roman Empire just in terms of technology. The the military that they had some of the most rigorous training and some of the most indoctrination, especially in places like the Janissary Corps or the Mamluks. They were a elite fighting force all the way around, except for maybe some of their slave fighting corps. And even towards the end, like especially towards the time of Mehmed II, there wasn't a lot of that being seen. They were a intensely dominant force on the battlefield, and they were one that kept a lot of European powers like the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania and the United Kingdom, France. They kept a lot of European monarchs awake at night, because if they had decided to push, the only thing between them and the Ottomans was the Holy Roman Empire, and they were struggling with the fact that the Byzantines had basically been knocked out by the Ottomans.
What do you think would have happened if I know I'm going to butcher his name, Mehmet? How do you say his name? Yeah. What do you think would have happened if Vlad would have killed him? Do you think the rest of the empire would have, the rest of the army would have gone after Vlad? Do you think they would have kind of fallen apart or retreated, or, you know?
So that entirely depends upon which point in the conflict he was killed. If it was towards the end, if it was about the third attempt where Vlad and his men led a night attack and stormed their camp, and he made it to the Sultan's tent, and the only reason he didn't kill Mehmed was Mehmed had been sleeping in other tents to avoid such a thing, because Vlad had already tried this twice.
Yeah.
If he had managed, if Mehmed had been full of himself and had been arrogant and had said, you know what, I want to sleep in my tent. It's for me. I don't care about the risk. If Vlad had managed to kill Mehmed at that point, the Ottoman Empire probably would have shattered to its roots and ran back to Turkey, with the exception of maybe the Janissary Corps. The Janissary Corps probably would have fought to the bitter end.
Yeah. So
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so you think if he would have been killed on the battlefield, you think they would have just kept fighting because they were already on the battlefield?
Only the Janissaries. Obviously, Vlad and his men would have fought and slaughtered as many of them as they could to a man, because they were invaders and there was a lot of anger and resentment for the years that they had spent as a vassal state. But specifically the Janissary Corps and maybe some of the more senior military officials and their personal units might have stayed behind to try to avenge the Sultan, simply because there was a stark difference between the Janissaries and your everyday conscript. Janissaries were young Christian boys that were taken often as a tribute from areas that had been vassalized by the Ottoman Empire, and then they were converted to Islam. They were raised up in the Ottoman army and constantly drilled, turned into the most elite killing machines you would ever see. They basically had a very Spartan like upbringing in the Islam world, and they were treated very well. I mean, the Janissaries were the many sultans' most prized units were often Janissary divisions because of how fervently they fought for their sultan, because they were treated very well, they were paid very well. Often, more often than not, they were given honor and titles, and they became more or less the sultan's elite core of their army. And a lot of the times they were the very bodyguards that would protect the sultan. So Vlad killing Med II in a night attack probably would have triggered the Janissaries to fight to the bitter end, to either avenge their lord by killing Vlad, killing all of the enemies that they could, or fighting to the death for the honor of their sultan.
Yeah. Do you think that was maybe the Sultan's plan for Vlad when they took him as a kid?
No. So Mehmed's father took Vlad as a kid.
Yeah.
And the plan for them, more or less, was to raise them in the Ottoman court, because one, Vlad and Radu's father had already shown himself to be an unreliable vassal king. He had already rebelled once.
I know they were trying to keep their dad in line.
Yeah, and the thing is that they knew that if their dad rebelled again, they would need somebody who can rule Wallachia, that will listen to them, that will have a bond with the Ottoman court. So, although Vlad and Radu, his younger brother, were taken as hostages and were told, hey, if your father rebels against us again, we're going to have to kill you because that's the terms of our agreement. I
Yeah.
feel like the Sultan's overall plan was, I'm going to take these young nobles, I'm going to raise them alongside my son, and they're basically going to be best friends. And as soon as their dad is out of the picture and they're of age to rule, I'm going to put them on the throne of Wallachia, and they will be staunch allies to my son when he takes over, because they're best friends and they grew up together.
Yeah. I think that very likely was his plan, but I don't know. I mean, Vlad went after all invaders. It wasn't like it was just Ottomans and everybody else could do what they want to. He went after everybody that he deemed an enemy.
Well, there weren't a lot of others. There weren't a lot.
Well, no, but I wonder. I wonder how much worse it was when he went after the Ottoman Empire, because they were raised as political hostages, basically. I mean, and he walked around every day knowing, if my dad messes up, they're going to kill me, even though that may not have been the Sultan's plan. The Sultan's plan, like you said, might have been just to replace their dad with them. But, as a young boy, they're being raised knowing, if our dad steps out of line, we're dead. So I wonder how much resentment he had. I mean, he never let it cloud his judgment, from what I've seen, and read about him. But
So I would say Vlad was faced with a very specific dilemma, a dilemma that's almost very specific to him, which is he was the firstborn son of a noble that had spent his first years of childhood, to the point where he could remember it, in the court of his father. And he was likely raised hating how the Ottomans were treating Wallachia and how the Ottomans were taxing them and demanding things from them, and the reason his father rebelled in the first place. And then he became a political prisoner, I would say, a little into the beginning of his adolescence. And then he grew up the rest of the way as a political prisoner. The thing is that he's still a firstborn son. He still has that entitlement of, my father's kingdom will one day be mine. I think he understood that there weren't a lot of other options for ruling Wallachia besides him and his younger brother. And he was the one that would come of age first. So a lot of the time when you read about the encounters that he and Mehmed II have, the few that anybody actually recorded, when you read about them, it kind of feels forced, like he's being friendly with Mehmed II, but it's kind of like I understand that you want to be my friend, but I also understand that you don't understand what your father and the empire you are going to inherit has done to me and my people. And if one day we can come to an agreement where you can understand that we have not been treated with the respect we deserve, then we can be friends. But up until this point, it's almost like he viewed Mehmed II as blissfully ignorant of the suffering of his people, because Mehmed was in line to inherit the Ottoman throne. I mean, after all of his brothers died, which he may or may not have had a hand in, we could get into that a little later. Mehmed was going to inherit one of the most powerful empires that the world had ever seen. I mean, he was the top of the world. And here he was, a kid meeting another young noble from a land that his family had conquered previously, just trying to be their friend out of, honestly, just genuine good faith of saying, hey, I want to be your friend. You're a noble. I'm a noble. Can't we be friends? And he just couldn't understand Vlad's perspective of, well, you're the son of an oppressor. Your intentions may be pure, but you're still the son of an oppressor. Now, Vlad's younger brother, Radu, it didn't seem like he really had that kind of view about it. But Radu spent pretty much his entire life in an Ottoman court.
Yeah.
Up until he took the reins to lead Wallachia, he pretty much was an Ottoman himself through and through.
Yeah. What do you? I want to ask you. This is a just for fun question. I've been told by people who have visited Scotland that if you go into the bars and everything, when people get good and drunk, if you bring up William Wallace, they will all, tell you that they're related to him. And they'll tell you how, like, oh, my great aunt was his great, 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 great grandniece or something, and they'll give you the whole family line. And most of them are lying. At least that's how it was in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I knew people that were going over there and frequenting those kind of places. I wonder if in history at any time, if that's been a thing in Romania for people to like try to like in the bars, in the pubs, like sitting around talking about how far down the line they're related to Vlad?
I probably wouldn't necessarily think that they would do that, just because again, Vlad, even in Romania, he is a folk hero. He is a very well regarded hero in a lot of Romanian culture, but even to this day, he's kind of controversial in his own in his own ways. Um, because while he had some brilliant tactics and a few what I would consider to be brilliant military victories, overall he lost the war.
Yeah.
Um, I think one that might be closer to the folk hero status of William Wallace for Wallachia specifically would be Michael the Second or Michael the Brave. Now he is one that doesn't come with all of the baggage of the draconian punishments and whatnot that Vlad is known for, but still for fighting for the freedom and integrity of his people, um, and being, just generally a well liked ruler.
Was he before or after Vlad?
I believe a little after. Let me look it up.
Okay. I know Vlad's sons were in power at some point, but not very long. And I honestly I can't remember if they were killed or just kind of got pushed out.
As far as I know, um, Vlad never had any sons, to my knowledge.
What I saw today was he had a bunch of sons, but that may not
that
be
might have been
right.
his
So
father.
try to look it up because I want to see because what I was seeing, I asked specifically if he had sons, and it brought up that he had several, but it may not be accurate. They could have been looking up, like you said, his dad.
Oh, he did. He had 3 sons.
I don't know if I'd consider three several, but yeah, I guess not to somebody like me who has five of them. So
Let's see.
I
The
want to think.
eldest okay, so Michael was after. Michael was almost 100 years after Vlad's time.
Okay,
The second youngest son died in 1486, and the youngest disappeared after 1495. But the eldest would reclaim the throne in 1508. So Michael might be a descendant of Vlad, but I'm not entirely sure. I would have to go through the genealogy of that to.
maybe. I saw that earlier when I was looking. Vlad was married twice. I can't remember who he was married to, and it didn't really go into it a whole lot. Just that he was married twice. I think his wife died the first time, and that's why he remarried. And I want to think they were opponent. They were rivals. They were the daughters of rivals, which is why he chose them. So it certainly wasn't like the Bram Stoker version where he meets her and falls madly in love with her and goes to battle and she kills herself. It wasn't anything like that. It was he married strategically for politics.
Yeah. So Michael the Brave claimed lineage and descendants from the house, from the Draculeshti branch of the House of Basarab, which is the branch that Vlad was from. A lot of people didn't believe him, and to this day, a lot of people don't believe him. But he did claim to be a descendant of Vlad. I would probably still say a lot of people wouldn't claim to be descendant from Vlad, but a lot of people might identify with him. Um, I don't know. Romania isn't, as far as I know, it is. It has its own problems with internal corruption, like every country does. But I don't know of a lot of external foreign influence that is bleeding the country dry in the same way that the Ottomans were.
Yeah.
So there probably isn't a lot of need for it. I mean, Scotland is still pretty pissed off because their stuff is extremely recent. With the Highland clearances and with the Glencoe massacre. So I can understand where that patriotism and that identity and the claims of descent from William Wallace
Well, I
stem
mean,
from
shit.
because
I even want to say that I'm related to William Wallace. Good grief. It like the true story, not even just watching Braveheart. I mean, it's a great movie, but William Wallace's true story is just as heroic and everything.
yeah, I would agree. Up until the last couple of battles, I mean, he was brilliant with his tactics in the beginning, but especially his very last battle, the use of the Shiltrons, um, and maintaining the Shiltrons under heavy longbow fire and under cavalry charge was very, I think, an organized withdrawal or a retreat probably would have been his best bet to survive once he had found out that those Scottish nobles had turncoated and betrayed him that day.
Yeah.
But they made their stand. They got massacred, and he was captured, and then he died. Um, had he been able to live and to escape and maybe regroup and consolidate with Robert the Bruce after the Bruce finally got his spine back and decided that he wanted to fight for the throne of Scotland, he and Wallace probably would have had a much easier time of it, because there were several times where Bruce himself almost died because he's a little bit of a blunderhead when it came to the battlefield up until about
Yeah.
Bannockburn.
Well, we got way off subject there. I didn't mean to go that far, but
Yeah,
I
we
love
did.
talking about him too. I'm sure we will have an episode about William Wallace. I mean, who wouldn't love that? I mean,
There were quite a few impolite things that happened during the Scottish Revolution.
yeah, I think there's more than one impolite thing we can talk about there. Give me an impolite fact about Vlad. I know trying to think of just one is kind of tough.
Well, let's see. Most of his stuff would have been the tactics that he used as far as the terrorism. I mean,
Yeah.
he was brutally efficient at psychologically tormenting and scaring the invading armies. There was plenty of times where they would set up their trees and their forests, as they called them, where the people that they impaled weren't dead yet. And
Yeah.
the Ottoman forces would arrive upon human beings being slowly impaled on giant wooden stakes, screaming in absolute agony, and they couldn't do anything for them except put them out of their misery. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, once you have a wooden stake that's been, lodged halfway through your body and is slowly working the rest of its way up, and you're still in fucking agony, there's not a lot you can do.
No, you pretty much just have to, cut them loose early.
No movie that wants to keep a rating below mature or below X is going to show the actual brutality of the things that Vlad did.
Yeah.
And the crushing reality of just how terrifying an opponent he was, because he would take a vastly numerically inferior army and would shock an army that was so much more numerically superior to his into surrendering, and then just massacre them in the
Yeah.
worst ways possible. He rarely took prisoners for any other reason other than trying to get information out of them, because they were invaders. They had no right to live,
Yeah.
at least in his eyes. And a lot of his a lot of the stances he took, not just towards invaders, but towards domestic criminals, were very, mm, what is a good term? Impolite.
Fucked up. Yeah, very impolite, fucked up. Guy was kind of a douchebag about it. I mean, I was looking at crucifixion and what actually kills you when you're crucified. Um, Kind of comparing some of the ways to die. As I think I would rather be set on fire than die by crucifixion or impalement. But I think I'm not sure which one of those I think is worse. Crucifixion, you can certainly live longer and suffer longer. Impalement, though, you can live quite a while if the stake happens to miss the vital organs. You can survive quite a while and could end up like you would have died quicker by crucifixion due to asphyxiation. Um,
and that's the most terrifying part about it, is that there are reports. Of course, we weren't there, so we can't confirm this. It sounds kind of
right.
fantastical when you say it now. But there were reports that Vlad and his men had gotten so good at impaling that they knew how to start the stake to where you would survive multiple days.
I've heard that before too.
And that's just, being set on fire, you're going to die no matter what.
Yeah,
Impaling, you're going to die no matter what, even if friendlies reach you. Crucifixion, you could survive, for a reasonable amount of time, and crucifixion can be undone. You can be taken down from whatever cross or shape that they, as long as it's not too crazy, they can take you down from whatever cross or shape that they put you up on
and
before you
depending
die.
on how long you've been there, if you've already been there long enough for your lungs to start having issues, then you're probably already gone. But yeah, if they got you down soon enough, probably you'd probably have a hell of an infection though, because I'm sure them nails were rusted that they used on people.
For sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, they're not going to waste good, clean nails on a criminal or on a person that's doomed to die,
Yeah.
um, unless they were a noble. If you had to crucify a noble, you'd probably give them clean nails so it went in easier.
Did they crucify nobles?
Yeah, nobles have been crucified.
Okay.
They crucify the Romans crucified plenty of Germanic nobles, especially during the leading up to the Teutoburg Forest massacre.
Okay.
Which again, history mirroring history, or history repeating itself. One of the things that Vlad was known for was, shortly after taking power, the Ottomans sent his emissaries to Wallachia to start extracting tribute and to start gathering up men for his Janissary Corps, which by contract, supposedly, at least in Vlad's terms, by contract, they weren't allowed to do anymore.
Yeah.
Vlad was still willing to play ball with them. He had seen both of his father's rebellions fail miserably, and he just kind of wanted to rule and consolidate power, and maybe contact some of the Western powers, his Western neighbors, to see if they would help him undo the yoke of oppression that the Ottoman Empire had over them. But these Ottoman emissaries spoke with him in his own court with great disrespect in front of all of the other nobles. And Vlad took it on the chin, and he understood that these nobles were seen as the mouth, or these nobles. He understood that these emissaries were seen as the mouth of the Sultan himself. So he had to treat them with a certain amount of respect, because anything that he did to them would be considered something he did to the Sultan.
Yeah.
And I believe the breaking point was he asked the Ottoman emissaries to remove their hats while speaking to him just as a sign of mutual respect. And the Ottoman emissaries more or less responded, "Why should we have to do that? We are the emissaries of the Sultan. What respect should we have for someone like you?" And then Vlad said, "All right, well, if you like your hats so much, I'll make sure you never have to take them off." And he had his men nail them to their heads. About his history, repeating history. One of the things that happened during the Teutoburg forest massacre, when the Germanic tribes fought back against the Romans that were oppressing them, was many of the Romans that they slaughtered, they beheaded them and nailed their heads to trees. And Vlad,
How do you nail
more
a
or less,
head to a tree?
probably a long nail through the eye socket, if I had to guess.
Oh, right. Yeah. I guess that was where I was thinking, like this way, like sideways. Well, I guess if you did it through the ear, I guess you could. I guess you could put nails through the ears and like do, like
You would
sideways
probably
up against
need
the tree.
you would probably need a longer nail to do it that way versus through the eye socket.
Well, it would have to. What would that be? Like 5 inches, maybe.
Well, you also got to think about the fact that
6 inches.
people on average have people on average have a bigger difference in the width of their skull versus how deep their skull is.
Oh,
On
you know
average, our
what?
skulls are pretty
You
much
could
the same
you
depth.
could go in this way, like into somebody's eye socket at an angle, and kind of nail them at an angle like this.
Well,
That would work.
you also gotta have you gotta have any future Roman soldiers that travels through the forest be able to see their face.
Well, if you get it right on the curve, you could put them like this, where they could still see like this.
Well,
But
as
but it would,
as
if you want them to see all of this though, and the look of like horror on their face, so that the other people can know, then yeah, going through that. Oh, through the mouth, like back of the throat.
yeah. Well, as lovely as the subject of the best way to
Yeah,
nail a
we
head
got
to
off
a
track
tree.
again.
um,
Sorry, guys. We'll get better. I promise.
but yeah, I mean, history's brutal, and we're discussing one of the most. Well, I hesitate to say one of the most brutal points in history because there are plenty of extremely just gory and ruthless points in human history.
Yeah,
We've been very rude to each other
yeah.
throughout our
We
existence.
we've been a little bit impolite in our history as human beings to each other. So yeah. So
Um,
let's talk about Vlad dying. Um, I know he died, and they sent his head to the Sultan as proof. And it's rumored that he put it on a stake in the city to prove to everybody, because your word wasn't all that was needed, especially for somebody like Vlad the Impaler. Those people needed to see his face to know for sure he was dead. But what? How did he die? How did they get over on him like that? Or was it just bad luck?
so towards towards the last battle, so Vlad fought a losing war. He won a lot of battles, but he fought a losing war without the assistance from Western powers, and a lot of Western powers were very hesitant to get involved in the fight because that would lead to a direct conflict with the Ottoman Empire, which had just taken Constantinople. I mean, at the time, that was making waves
Yeah,
throughout the world. I wouldn't be
right.
surprised if
A
somebody in
lot of
China
people
heard
wanted.
about it.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people wanted to just sit back and hope that the Ottoman Empire didn't notice them.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, there were certain places like I would say the UK and England probably were like, well, they have to get through They have to get through the Holy Roman Empire. They have to get through France. They might go through Spain, and then they could get to us. They probably would have been watching for any of those, you know, kingdoms or empires to fall before they actually started to worry about it. But Vlad had no support.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what led him to his death. Was he had no support from regional and Western quote unquote allies who constantly said that they were going to back him up, and all he had to do was win one more battle to prove that the Ottomans could be defeated. But they didn't. They let Vlad wear the Ottomans out, and they let Vlad show them what the Ottomans were capable of, so that when they eventually would decide to go against the Ottomans, they would know what to expect. But Vlad sustained his campaign on a lot of empty promises. And towards the end of his conflict with the Ottomans, his men were just spent. I mean,
Yeah.
he started with a really sizable army, some estimate between 20 and 50,000. And towards the end of it, I mean, a generous window would have put his force at around 8,000. Almost every battle he fought, he lost men that he couldn't replenish,
Yeah.
because Wallachia, his land, was already reeling from the previous two rebellions that his father had waged. So when he raised his army of 50,000, those were all the boys who grew up around the same time he did. Those were all the fighting age men that grew up around the same time he did.
Yeah.
And with how economically plundered the nation was after his father lost the second rebellion and died, before he could retake the throne, which, by the way, this doesn't even get into the fact that he had to lead a military campaign to take the throne in the first place. The Ottomans didn't just give it to him, he had to take it back.
That's kind of interesting. That if that was the Sultan's plan, or well, we don't know for sure if that was the Sultan's plan, but if it was the Sultan's plan, then why would he have to fight to get it back unless they knew he was going to do this shit?
He had to prove that he was a good ally. He had to prove that if they decided that he needed to be a general in their army, he knew how to fight. He had to prove that he was worth their time, basically, because they already had somebody in Wallachia that was paying them their tax after his father died. It might have been his uncle or a cousin. I can't remember right off the top of my head. But they
Yeah.
already had somebody in Wallachia that was paying them the taxes that they wanted. It was at the expense of the kingdom. I mean, the kingdom was rife with crime and with just depravity, but he was getting the Ottomans what they wanted. And so Vlad raised kind of a paltry force behind his name, because he was the heir apparent. And he had some, I would say, token support. Like, I'm sure the Ottoman Empire was like, here's 500 men. You should be able to do plenty with that. They're Ottomans, after all.
Yeah.
Um, but Vlad had to fight a military campaign to take his throne. Then he had to more or less fight a campaign within his own kingdom to root out corrupted nobles and to consolidate power and to raise his levies so that he had his own standing army. And then he had to fight the big fight against the Ottomans, when their disrespect and disregard for his nobility and his rank became too much.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the Ottomans at this point had a massive empire. They had hundreds of thousands of soldiers to draw upon. Not even counting the Janissary Corps or the Mamluks or any other fighting force that they had. They could conscript people left, right, and center. If it was a war of attrition, the Wallachia would have lost that war of attrition every, like, 9 times out of 10. Um, the Ottomans just had better technology. The Ottomans were more tactically superior. They were a proven fighting force that had taken down Constantinople and had practiced with cannon and had practiced with like in like real world battlefield tactics. They weren't just drilled; they were actually battle proven. Whereas Wallachians, more or less, it was kind of a mix. You had new conscripts, you had some that were battle proven from Vlad's father's time, then you had some that were battle proven from Vlad taking his throne, and then you just had those in between.
Yeah.
He the honestly, the fact that he did what he did with what he had, and that he struck so many blows against the Ottoman Empire that he became a nightmare for Sultan Mehmed II and his family and his rule overall. I mean, the fact that with literally every card in the deck stacked up against him, with the exception of home field advantage, Vlad still put up a very valiant fight.
Yeah.
Is honestly one of the most incredible military campaigns in history. Barring, in my opinion, barring things such as Belisarius's reconquering of Rome, or Hannibal's push into the upper part of Rome, or Cao Cao reuniting the Chinese Empire.
Yeah. All things we will probably talk about, because I'll bet there's a little bit of impoliteness going on there.
There's a little bit of impolite. Yeah, you could say that. Hannibal's story is pretty. I'm not quite sure about Belisarius. I don't know how much impoliteness was going on there. Those were just brilliant military victories, and he was just a brilliant commander. Hannibal was pretty impolite. He was a pretty impolite individual. And Cao Cao was impolite, just not to his enemies. He was just a very impolite person. Not like he was rude or
Oh,
anything, but when you're rumored to pull an arrow out of your eye, or get shot in the eye with an arrow, yank it out, and then eat the eye, that's not very polite.
no, that has no place in polite society. We definitely need to cover that.
Yeah.
We'll
Badass.
talk about the episode where we cover that one. I'll bet that's going to be a good one. And sounds yummy.
Squishy.
Squishy. It sounds squishy. Oh my goodness. Well, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tempest, Vlad the Third, whatever you call him, Vlad Dracula. He went on. His name goes down in history. He's a legend. He's a horror legend. Dracula is one of those movie monsters that's never going away.
On a scale of polite to impolite, I would rate Vlad Dracula impolite parentheses good in parentheses.
Like impolite in a good way.
Oh yeah, he certainly wasn't Lu Bu, or anybody like that.
Yeah, we'll get to that impoliteness too, I'm sure. All right, I think that's all I got. Do you have any facts you want to share about him right quick, or?
Yeah, Vlad Dracula is a horror icon, mainly because of Bram Stoker and his spin on his tale and whatnot. But there were urban legends about him prior to that, what we would consider urban legends today, I guess folklore.
Yeah.
The most important thing to understand about Vlad Dracula is that if I were to quantify his impact on history, he was one of the world's, I would say, first and most successful. If success was the metric to base it off of, he was the world's first ever terrorist. He fought a guerrilla war, ruled through terror, struck fear and fear that lasted for generations upon generations in the Ottoman Empire, even though they won.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something special when you have an empire as great as the Ottoman empires, and you have a man as powerful as Mehmed II and his entire family in fear of you long after you're dead. Because there were always rumors that the head that they got sent wasn't his.
Yeah.
And there were always rumors that Vlad was going to return and was going to exact his revenge upon the Ottoman Empire. When you get a reputation like that, you are a very successful terrorist.
Yeah.
Just
Absolutely.
an
And a terrorist that has gone down in history as a household name. Everybody, probably over the age of, I don't know, maybe 10, knows who Dracula is. They might not know where he comes from. They might not know the story behind him. And when I was in school, we were told about Vlad and the impalings, but we were never really told what impaling was. I mean, as far as we knew, they took a spear and shoved it through your body, which is not technically wrong, but they
yeah.
didn't explain the route of entry at all.
Well,
So
there were two different routes of entry that they would use. It would either go through your shoulder or between your legs.
yeah, and we didn't get that. I mean, we would see stuff on TV or movies or whatever where somebody gets stabbed in the stomach, so we thought that's that's probably how it happened. We just didn't think it. What's the big deal? Like, who cares? Okay, some old guy ran a spear through 20,000 people. Like, is that all it took to scare them? And it's I get why we don't teach kids the impolite history,
Yes.
but at the same time, I feel like we do them a disservice because
Well,
you can't
it's hard.
understand why he was so feared if you just think he was stabbing people in the gut with a spear.
It's hard to sell parents on on a forest of bodies, on a forest of rotting corpses and people who are still alive. It's hard to sit in a classroom, even of teenagers, and tell them there was this man in recent memory that was only 500 years ago compared to a lot of human history. That's very recent. Um, there was a man that went around, and if you were the wrong kind of person in his nation, you had pretty good odds of ending up on a stake slowly being impaled while your countrymen walked by and could do nothing except stab you in the heart so that you died quicker. It's a hard sell, and even to this day, and for modern audiences, it's a hard sell. I mean, when you watch any modern movies such as Dracula Untold, where they discuss his story and everything. A lot of it is dramatized, obviously, because of the vampire factor. I mean,
Yeah,
these days you can't really have a Dracula story without it being either a historical documentary or about vampires.
right.
Um, but even movies like that, even dramatizations um, and documentaries and stuff, it's still a really hard sell because that is a very gruesome image for anybody to be exposed to. You
I
could
get what
know,
you're saying, but I think in this day and age of information, I I maybe we don't show them pictures or AI generated what does impaling look like, or videos like that. But I do think we got, hopefully it's a little bit more descript. So because I remember as a kid, none of us knew why it was such a big deal or why Dracula he became Dracula. Like, so what? I mean, literally, we weren't taught anything. We weren't even taught about what a great military leader or anything, any of his accomplishments. It was just like he lived, he impaled people, a bunch of them, and he died. And that was our history. And I was grown before I found out what impaling actually is, and then and then read about Vlad on my own and was like, holy shit! No wonder people thought he was a fucking vampire.
Yeah, I mean, there were often stories of him and his men, because towards the end of the war they became very they were very strapped for rations and stuff because again, one of the things Vlad also did was wage total war and scorched earth. So every bit of land that they lost to the Ottomans, they razed to the ground so that the Ottomans could not resupply from their country. And the problem with that is that if you eventually push them back, you still have to feed your army. And now
Yeah,
you can't resupply from your own lands because you've slaughtered all of the livestock, you've burned all of the grain to the ground. This is why he became so dependent upon Western allies for help, and why when they didn't help, it ultimately it led to the end of his war and to the end of his life. If he his and I call him a terrorist because, like, by definition, he is. I mean, he fought and waged war through like using fear as his main deterrent and his main measure of control over both his own people and the battlefield. Um, if you weren't afraid of him at that time, you were stupid. If you were in
yeah,
Wallachia and you weren't afraid of Vlad Dracula III, you were an idiot because he commanded the utmost respect and the utmost fear through how he did things, and through just the app. And the thing is that there's a difference between horror and terror. Horror is witnessing what is happening. When when the Ottomans rolled up on Targovishta and saw thousands upon thousands of their own men, citizens, emissaries, things like that, impaled and they made a literal forest of bodies. They were horrified.
right.
After they advanced beyond Targovishta to hunt Vlad down, they were terrified because they were afraid of they were anticipating something happening. They were anticipating the next ambush, the next night attack. They were anticipating the next forest of bodies that they come across, and they were anticipating becoming a part of that forest. And that's where the
Right.
terror comes from. That's why I identify him as a terrorist, which has a very negative connotation in today's day and age. And I don't want people to think that I'm disparaging him or that I, think that he equates to modern day terrorists,
Yeah,
who also fight and rule through fear. Um, but by definition, I mean, that's what Vlad was. I mean,
yeah,
there's there's not really a polite way to put it. I mean, fear was his game and he played it very well.
yeah. He was good at the fear thing. Well, MC, we're going to have to wrap up this episode, but we'll be back. We've got some more impolite shit to say.
For sure.
All right. Until next time, keep on looking at the impolite side of history because that's where the real shit's at.
Polite history is fun. Impolite history can be funny, but more often than not, it's just depressing.
Bye, everybody.